Have you tried everything and still failed to achieve what you said was your biggest dream? Well, I'm going to tell you something that no one has ever told you with brutal honesty. The reason you haven't achieved your goals yet is not because you lack talent. It's not because you lack time, and it's definitely not because you lack opportunities. It's because you haven't learned to push yourself to win. I know, it hurts to hear that. But it is that pain that will forge you. Because right now, as you listen to my voice, thousands of men and women around the world are winning colossal internal battles, not because they are lucky, but because they have learned to master their own spirit. Self-discipline is the only reliable bridge between your miserable starting point and the greatness you say you want. And if you listen to me carefully until the end, I'll give you, step by step, how to forge that power within yourself. Not just any method, but the same principle that transformed a young Scottish immigrant, poor and dirty, from the factories of Pittsburgh, into one of the richest and most influential men in history. I am Andrew Carnegie, and I am here to teach you how to force yourself to win, even when you are broken, afraid, or completely unmotivated. At the end of this video, if your mind is still the same, it is because you refused to face the truth. So listen to me with everything you've got. And if you value this journey of rebuilding that is beginning now, join us. You know what to do. The human mind is like a foundry. Pure steel is only born under extreme heat. And in the same way, a man only becomes unbreakable when he goes through the fire of internal demand, not the external fire of others, bosses, parents, society, but the fire he lights every day when he decides he will no longer be a dead weight in the gears of the world, when he decides that he will achieve what he has set out to achieve, whatever the cost. I learned this in the basements of factories, where the heat and noise of steel shaped not only metals, but men. Men who sweated in silence, who didn't complain about the pain, who got up even when their muscles no longer responded. They didn't know it, but they were building a philosophy in me, that willpower overcomes everything. That was imprinted on my soul like an invisible tattoo. Those who don't demand more of themselves than the world demands of them will never be great. And maybe that's your current prison. You wait for motivation to appear like a bolt of inspiration. You wait for the environment to push you, for others to validate you, for fate to push you in the right direction. But I ask you, what exactly are you waiting for? For someone to come to your door and tell you that you are allowed to change your life? That will never happen. The world has no interest in your victory. It will continue to turn while you sink into mediocrity, unless you start pushing yourself, like an emperor who forces his army to cross deserts. Pushing yourself means building, every day, an internal lever that does not depend on the weather, your mood, compliments, or circumstances. It's looking at the alarm clock and getting up even when your body begs for more sleep. It's sitting down to study when your mind wants distraction. It's delivering impeccable work even when no one is looking. That's the brutal difference between those who build empires and those who spend their entire lives complaining about the system. When I set up my first steel foundry, I had every reason to give up. The competition was brutal. Capital was scarce, and the days were long and hard, but there was something in me that others didn't have. The determination to win, with or without enthusiasm. I forced myself to learn faster than anyone else. I forced myself to hire the best, even if it meant taking huge risks. I forced myself to fire those who weren't efficient, even if they were friends. I forced myself to work with almost military precision. And that's exactly what turned a small business into a productivity machine that supplied the railroad tracks of an entire country. Do you think you need motivation to act? That's for children. Men who change history are not moved by excitement, they are moved by commitment. They do what needs to be done, even when their whole soul screams to stop. Now I want you to look at your life. How many goals have you set that have died in the sand of time? How many promises have you made to yourself and broken in silence, without anyone knowing? Every time you do this, you are training your brain to ignore you. You are programming your body not to take you seriously. And that is the root of all failure. You no longer believe in yourself because you don't keep your promises. The only way to break this cycle is with brute force of action. Force yourself to meet deadlines. Force yourself to reject excuses. Force yourself to get up earlier. Force yourself to say no to immediate pleasure. Every time you do this, something changes inside you. You become less fragile, less impressionable, less manipulable. And that's when the magic happens. When you start acting like a man forged in steel. The world starts treating you like one. Doors open, people listen to you, opportunities appear. Because no one can resist the magnetism of someone who has complete control over themselves. But it requires pain. It will require you to give up comfort, break your lazy habits, and face yourself as a general faces a rebellious soldier. Because, in a way, that's what you are. A battlefield between what you want and what you're willing to endure. Do you want $1 million business? Force yourself to learn about finance and strategy every day. Do you want a healthy body? Force yourself to train even on days when everything in you wants to give up. Do you want freedom? Force yourself to pay the price of responsibility. No one is going to give you anything. Everything worthwhile comes at a high price. And the first price to be paid is always your laziness, your wounded ego. Your old, mediocre self that insists on surviving. That's why I created a principle of life that has guided me until my last breath. A person who does not control themselves will never control anything of value. Engrave this in your heart. Because if you can't control what you eat, what you think, what you feel, how can you lead teams, companies, legacies? Strength begins in the soul. And the soul grows stronger when you stop running away from effort. Most people live as slaves to their emotions. They wake up and decide what to do based on how they feel. If they're excited, they do it. If they're tired, they don't. If they are afraid, they retreat. That is the manual for mediocrity, and the only way out is to rewrite that manual with blood, sweat, and deliberate action. True power begins when you ignore what you feel and do what needs to be done. When you realize that emotion is a visitor, but action is a builder. During the early years of my empire, there were days when I could barely breathe from exhaustion. I slept 3 hours a night, faced grueling meetings with bankers who wanted to crush me, negotiated contracts, while listening to my team implode inside. But there was one phrase I repeated to myself: no one is going to stop me because I won't let myself stop. I was my own commander, and also my most disciplined soldier. I didn't give myself the right to fail, not because I was perfect, but because I had already decided that my goal was non-negotiable. And that's the key. As long as you see your goals as options, you'll keep wavering. You'll keep starting and stopping, desiring and sabotaging yourself, admiring those who succeed, and punishing yourself for still being stuck. But the day you turn your goal into a sacred obligation, your brain will adapt. It will understand that there is no other option, that giving up is not in your vocabulary. And when that happens, you begin to act with the quiet fury of those who have a pact with greatness. The human brain is plastic. It molds itself to the environment you create. And if you train it with excuses, it becomes an architect of sabotage. But if you train it with determination, with routine, with brutal repetition, it becomes a weapon, a machine, an extension of your will. That's what I did to myself. I wasn't born with special gifts. I was born hungry. And I tamed that hunger with purpose and discipline. I forced myself to study while others were distracted. I forced myself to listen to mentors even when I thought I knew better. I forced myself to give up momentary pleasure for the lasting pleasure of victory. You need to understand one fundamental thing. Success will never ask for your permission. It will test your courage every day. It will put pain on your agenda, exhaustion on your calendar, doubt on your pillow. And you will only defeat this enemy if you decide to be tougher than it is. Not out of pride, but because you have a mission. Don't now stop for a second and listen to me with your soul. Do you realize what you are wasting when you don't act? Do you have any idea what you could have built by now if you had maintained a high-performance routine for just 18 months? Do you know how many lives you could have impacted if you had followed through with absolute discipline on the last project you abandoned? Regret is the silent price that time charges the weak, and if you keep putting off taking action, you will pay that price with tears, loneliness, and resentment. I've seen it happen to great men, brilliant men who sank into irrelevance because they never learned to push themselves to keep going when everything was screaming at them to stop. That's why I say this firmly: every goal, no matter how grand, bows before the strength of a man who doesn't negotiate with his own laziness. I want you to imagine your biggest dream right now. Visualize it in rich detail. Now ask yourself, what would I be willing to do for this if I knew that time was running out? Because the truth is, it is. Every day that passes is one less brick you can lay. Every week that repeats itself is a golden opportunity being thrown away. Do you want to know what separates ordinary men from men who change civilizations? It's simple. The former wait for the will. The latter build willpower. They create rituals. They make commitments to themselves. They create non-negotiable execution systems. They don't rely on mood. They rely on their schedule, on routine, on building identity. And this is where I introduce a concept that you need to apply urgently: identity engineering. If you want to achieve any goal, whether financial, physical, intellectual, or spiritually, need to stop trying to change your habits with willpower and start changing your identity with definitive decisions. Don't say, "I want to lose weight" anymore. Say, "I am a man who takes care of his body like an athlete." Don't say, "I want to make more money." Say, "I am a creator of wealth and impact." You need to see yourself as someone who has already won, because the brain acts according to who you believe you are. And if you continue to see yourself as someone who tries, who fails, who gives up, that is exactly what you will perpetuate. Start today to act like you've already gotten there. Don't wait for external recognition. It will come when your internal authority is so solid that no one else doubts it. And that only comes from one process: forcing yourself to win every day. In the little things, in the details, in the schedules, in the silences, in the invisible decisions that no one sees, but that shape everything. And now that you're listening to this with your heart pounding, I want to challenge you. Tell me in the comments what goal you are determined to achieve. No matter how long it takes, declare it with the courage of those who have burned their bridges and have no way back. Because from now on, you are a man forged to win. And there is only one destination for those who commit themselves at this level: victory. Do you want to win? Then learn this once and for all. Success is not a matter of talent, it is a matter of structure. And structure is built. It is not waited for, it is not desired. Its absence is not lamented. It is imposed. It is created with discipline and maintained with repetition. Because, you see, the man who masters himself is not the most intelligent. He is the most organized. He is the one who wakes up at the same time every day. He is the one who knows what he is going to do before the day dawns. He is the one who draws up the plan and executes it as if he were building a bridge between his miserable present and the future he deserves. I built one of the largest industrial companies in history not because I had special gifts, but because I organized my time and resources with almost military precision. I knew where every penny was, I knew the value of every minute, and I treated my commitments with the same seriousness as a general on the march. And that's what you lack: structure, routine, order. You start projects with enthusiasm and stop at the first sign of fatigue. That's childishness disguised as confusion. Because when you have a daily plan and execute it without negotiation, you stop depending on motivation. You start depending on structure, and that's 1,000 times more reliable. Wake up early, exercise, study, work with focus. You already know all this. But knowing doesn't change anything. What changes is executing even when you don't want to. And that's where what I call the Carnegie standard of discipline comes in. Decide once and never negotiate. Look, I didn't wake up every day thinking, will I work 16 hours today? I woke up and worked. Because the decision had already been made. And when the decision is made, you save mental energy, avoid distractions, and eliminate excuses. That's mastery. That's efficiency. That's what builds fortunes, legacies, and empires. And that's why you need to create your own systems. A fixed wake-up time. A morning ritual that energizes your body and puts your mind in war mode. A distraction-free environment. A weekly schedule. A reading plan. A method for measuring progress. Because what isn't measured doesn't evolve. What isn't planned doesn't thrive. What is not executed with rhythm dies. You can tell me that your life is chaotic, that your schedule is unpredictable, that you have children, bills, pressures. I know that. I saw it up close in the working-class homes of Pittsburgh. But you know what else I saw? That even in the midst of chaos, it is possible to create microspaces of order. A man can wake up half an hour earlier. He can plan his day the night before. He can turn off his cell phone for 2 hours and focus on what matters. He can say no to useless invitations. He can create structure where today there is disorder. And if he does this repeatedly, life changes. You won't win by luck. You'll win because you designed your victory in daily blocks of raw execution. Because instead of waiting for luck, you became systematic, methodical, and consistency destroys resistance. But I warn you, it will be boring. It will be painful. It will seem like it's not working. Because real progress is slow and silent. At first, no one will notice. Not even you. But keep going. Keep planting. One day, something inside you will change. You will begin to see yourself as someone who doesn't fail, who follows through, who delivers, who pushes themselves, and that will create an inner power that no one can take away from you. That is the secret of empires, the invisible repetition that builds visible power. Do you want recognition? First, recognize yourself as someone worthy of respect. Do you want freedom? Build discipline. Do you want results? Structure your life like a CEO who manages an empire, even if today you only have an old bicycle and an idea in your head. I started out as a messenger. I ran between offices carrying notes and contracts. But I already acted like someone who would one day manage fortunes. I watched the big shots. I copied their habits. I read secretly during breaks. I wrote down what I learned. I made plans, and little by little, I gained momentum. Because structure generates momentum, and momentum overcomes obstacles that once seemed insurmountable. Now, listen carefully. You need to create your own code of conduct. A code that will govern your life as if it were a personal constitution. Something that says, I wake up at 5 a.m., I read for 30 minutes, I work for 3 hours without interruption, I take care of my body every day, I eliminate distractions, I meditate, I write, I review. This is not fanaticism. This is personal leadership. And those who do not lead themselves will never lead teams, companies, or legacies. And yes, it will alienate you from people. It will seem strange. They will call you obsessed. But disciplined obsession is the price of excellence. And when the results start to show, when your mind is sharp, your body is strong, your bank account is growing, all those who criticized you will want to know your secret. And you will say, there was no secret. There was choice and structure. Every empire begins with ruins. There is no construction without prior destruction. And that's where I see the biggest mistake in people who say they want to win. They want to win without suffering. They want to grow without falling. They want the result without the ruin that precedes it. But that's not how the game works. Defeat is the most fertile ground for growth, as long as you learn to use it as a tool for refinement. When my first project failed, I could have buried myself in discouragement. I was 23 years old. I lost capital, I lost allies, I lost nights of sleep, but instead of lamenting, I did something that few do. I sat down at a table, wrote down every mistake, understood every flaw, and created a new plan based on the harsh reality. No illusions, no victimhood. It was this practice that allowed me, years later, to build a company that made more in a week than my entire first project did in a year. And that's what you need to start doing. Turn every fall into a laboratory. You didn't fail for nothing. Every mistake brings data. And those who ignore that data are doomed to repeat the same cycle until time destroys them completely. Look, I'm not a naive optimist. I believe in the power of mistakes, but only when they are used as a tool for rebuilding. Pain is only worthwhile if it is converted into energy. Otherwise, it becomes a prison. And most people are imprisoned by old pains that they refuse to transform into strength. Do you want to win? Then learn to rewrite your narrative. Don't say, I failed anymore. Say, I tried an approach that didn't work, and now I'm smarter. Don't say, I lost everything. Say, I gained clarity about what I will never do again. Words shape the mind, and the mind shapes your decisions. You need to talk like a builder, not a mourner. I used to say to my managers, you can make mistakes quickly, but you can't make the same mistake twice. That's the code. You can fail, as long as you learn so quickly that the mistake becomes irrelevant. And that only happens with a raw growth mindset. A mind that takes notes, analyzes, revises, and strikes again. But it's not just pain that destroys. Pleasure is dangerous too, especially the pleasure of the comfort zone, the pleasure of stability, the pleasure of staying average because you're better than before. That's the most subtle poison there is, and many fail because of it, because they stop pushing themselves when they reach an acceptable level. But I ask you, do you want an acceptable life or an epic life? Because the difference between the two lies in how much you are willing to push yourself, even after everything seems to be going well. I never stopped, even with millions in the bank, even with global recognition. I continued to push myself like it was the first day, because I knew that decline begins when you relax. And no matter how high you climb, if you stop pushing yourself, you will fall. The gravity of the world pulls you down every day, and only those who push themselves to climb continuously remain at the top. You need to make a pact with yourself, an internal vow, a non-negotiable promise that you will continue to grow until your last breath, because life isn't about getting somewhere, it's about becoming someone who keeps moving, who no longer depends on external stimuli, who doesn't need to be pushed, who is the engine, not the train car. And now I'm going to give you a principle that has saved me countless times. The obstacle is the map. When something gets stuck, when something hurts, when something fails, that's not the end. It's an indication of the path you need to strengthen. Don't run away from what's difficult. That's where the key lies. That's where the next level lies. That's where others give up and you win. Every time you force yourself to keep going in the face of a challenge, you unlock a more powerful version of yourself. And that version will give you access to things that seem impossible today. But there will be no free pass. There will be demands. There will be sweat. There will be days when all you have is your decision not to stop. And those days are the most important. Those are the days when the empire begins to be built from within. Make no mistake. The giants you admire were men and women who said yes to pain and no to excuses. They woke up early when everything hurt. They trained when they were exhausted. They studied when everyone else had gone to sleep. They started over when they had no strength left. And that is exactly what made them immortal. Now look at your story. It hasn't been written yet, but you can decide right now that it will be an epic one, that it will include battles and defeats, but also victories, glory, and transformation. It just depends on how much you are willing to push yourself. Because the world doesn't reward intention. The world rewards raw, continuous action. Are you ready for that? Are you ready to look in the mirror and say, from today on, nothing can stop me. Are you ready to build a legacy that screams, "He lived with purpose and power"? Then go ahead, because everything you need is already inside you. It just needs to be forced to emerge. Mastering yourself is the first stage. The second is using that mastery to shape the world around you. When you become disciplined, consistent, and unstoppable, something extraordinary happens. People start to follow you. Leadership ceases to be a title and becomes a consequence. Because no one can resist the magnetism of someone who lives with strength and direction. When I started scaling my businesses, I quickly realized that being technically good wasn't enough. I needed to be a leader. I needed to inspire, correct, guide, and build elite teams. And I understood that there is no leadership without self-discipline. The leader is the first to arrive, the last to give up. The example that silences any resistance. And that's the next step in your journey, turning your personal discipline into practical leadership. You'll start to notice that people come to you for clarity, that they want to learn from your habits, that they watch you, that they're inspired by how you talk, walk, work, and that's when you have the chance to build something bigger than yourself, a team, a structure, a business, a movement. But be careful, to lead others, you need to have absolute control over yourself. Because, if you still betray yourself in small decisions, how can you demand consistency from others? If you still give in to laziness, how can you demand excellence from an employee? Leadership requires consistency. And consistency comes from the silent discipline you cultivate every day, even when no one is watching. In my business, I did not tolerate mediocrity. But I also did not demand more from others than I demanded from myself. That was the secret. They saw my level. They knew I was willing to do whatever it took. And that created such a strong culture of excellence that people eliminated the weak themselves. The culture became self-sufficient because it all starts with a leader. Now look around you. What are you building? Who are you shaping? What kind of energy are you spreading in your environment? If everything around you is confusing, disorganized, and weak, don't blame others. Blame the lack of strength that still exists within you. Because true leadership transforms the environment. It inspires, provokes, builds, demands. And that only comes when you stop living like someone who needs motivation and start living like someone who radiates power. You may have noticed, the world is full of weak leaders, bosses with no presence, entrepreneurs with no structure, influencers with no substance, all trying to lead with charisma, but without real authority. And that always falls apart. Because authority does not come from appearance. It comes from consistency. It comes from the ability to say and do, to promise and deliver, to dream and execute. That's why you need to keep pushing yourself, not just for you, but because the world needs real leaders, men who don't back down, who don't lie to themselves, who build with their own hands, who inspire by their presence, who win by example, the kind of man who, when he walks into a room, makes everyone around him feel that something great is about to happen. And this transformation is not magic. It is the result of years of pushing yourself when everything seemed against you. Of days when you were the only one who believed. Of nights when you kept working while everyone else slept. Of unpopular decisions. Of sacrifices. Of small habits repeated with brutal consistency. Because, in the end, you're not just building a business, a career, or a name. You're building an invisible empire. A legacy, an identity that will stand the test of time. And that's only possible when you act like an emperor from the very first brick. Even if you're still alone, without resources, without recognition, you act like you already have it. Because you know that everything is already being forged inside. And here's another revelation. The universe rewards those who don't compromise on their mission. When you start acting with discipline, opportunities appear. Not by coincidence, but because you created space for them. You were ready. You had structure. You knew what to do. How many opportunities have passed you by and you wasted because you weren't ready, because you were still in reactive, emotional, scattered mode? Well, know this, they will come back. But only if you change now. Only if you decide that every day will be a preparation. That every task, no matter how simple, will be performed as if your life depended on it, because it does. You never know when the phone will ring, when a contact will show up, when a golden opportunity will arise. And when it does, you need to be ready. You need discipline, structure, clarity, strength. And that can only be built by pushing yourself every day. Life doesn't warn you, it tests you, and those who pass the tests are the ones who don't stop in the middle of the process. They are the ones who keep digging when the ground seems dry. They are the ones who keep going when the world screams to give up. They are the ones who lead with action, not promises. And now I ask you, are you going to keep hiding behind excuses? Or are you going to take your place as a leader, even without a title, position, or followers? Because leadership starts with a decision to no longer live below your potential. And that's only possible when you force yourself to win, even if you have to start over, alone, in the dark. You're here now, listening to me until the end. That says a lot. Because the weak would have given up in the second minute. The distracted would have jumped to another video. But you stayed. And if you stayed, it's because something in you is ready to break through. Ready to stop playing with your own life and start building with the seriousness of a man who understands that there is no more time to waste. I didn't come here to motivate you, I came to forge you. I came to remind you that there is a strength inside you that is dormant and that it will only be awakened when you start treating yourself as someone worthy of absolute respect. Because in the end, all you lack is respect for yourself. Respect not to break your promises. Respect not to negotiate with your own laziness. Respect not to accept anything less than greatness. Life will continue to challenge you. It will continue to knock, test, and try to throw you off course. And you have two choices. Either you mold yourself to the world and live at its mercy, or you force the world to mold itself to your presence. But to do that, you have to push yourself first. Force yourself to act even when you're at rock bottom. Force yourself to grow even when everything seems lost. Force yourself to win, because the alternative is to become irrelevant. And I guarantee you, there is no greater feeling than looking back and realizing that every scar was worth it. That every difficult morning built internal muscles. That every sacrifice paved the road to your freedom. That everything you forced yourself to do brought you to a place where most will never arrive. You were created to build, to lead, to serve with excellence, to live with intensity. But that won't happen by osmosis. It will happen when you turn every minute of your day into a conscious decision. When your schedule reflects your future, not your weaknesses. When your body, your mind, and your finances are treated as sacred territory. And when you stop waiting for the right moment and understand that the right moment is now, because it's the only one you really have. Starting today, you will walk differently. You will think differently. You will behave differently. Because now you have a code, an internal command, a purpose that does not negotiate. You are no longer a spectator of your own life. You are the architect, the engineer, the soldier, and the commander, all at the same time. Because that's what empire builders do. They take on everything, they carry everything, they deliver everything. I want you to leave here with a decision, to never again accept less than you know you deserve. But more than that, the decision to become the kind of man who deserves what he wants. Because wanting is not enough. You have to deserve it. And deserving is built with effort, discipline, character, and consistency. And if you understand the message so far, pass it on to others. Share it with those who need this transformation. Subscribe to this channel so you don't miss any new mentoring sessions. Because what we started here doesn't end now. It's just the first step in a complete reconstruction of your identity. A reconstruction that will take you to the top, not by luck, but by absolute merit, that you already know what to do. Now you just have to do it. See you on the battlefield.